Hi.
That's so much better.
It's better. It's
That's
still
way
not
better.
perfect. I did that in 2 seconds just to make it a
I
little bit
think I'm
better.
gonna
For those,
in the future replace my background with the cartoon. Nice, like with the imagery of the intro. It seems a little more flighty, a little nicer.
right,
Yeah.
right.
So
So, hello everybody. I'm Isabella Kaminska, and
and
as usual, I'm joined by Junseth. Hello, Junseth. How are you?
very well. How are you
I'm good. I'm good. I
out
think
there in the snowy Alps? You are in Davos as we speak. As you can see, you're actually recording outside.
that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. On the French side.
I always feel like I said this to you earlier, but Europeans always have a lot more fun than Americans. I feel like you guys are like 5 minutes from everywhere, so you just kind of like, I feel like going skiing today, and you're like, I'm gonna fly to Sweden.
It is true. I've always felt sorry for people who live in New York because getting out of New York seems a bit of a mission. You can
No,
only
it's
really
just
go
it's just a
to
train, just a train. You just go down to the Penn Station or
yeah, but you
whatever,
can't.
and then you buy a ticket to like New Hampshire.
Yeah, but
It's not bad.
that's literally the only place you can go. Like, where else can you really go? Boston.
Providence, Rhode Island,
Yeah,
Connecticut,
it's not the same
Pennsylvania.
diversity of options as like getting on a plane and being within an hour or two in any European capital. Like, there's a lot
True.
more diversity here.
For New Year's, we actually ended up in Pennsylvania, and we got stuck because all the airplanes are going down here.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
and so JetBlue canceled our flight because apparently the crew had timed out. I'm not a flight guy, but that apparently happened. So they canceled our flight. We knew about it like an hour before we had to leave. They were offering like no refunds, nothing. And so I got on the phone with them, and they got me a flight out of New York. So I just bought a train ticket, and I was in New York in like an hour and a half.
excellent.
So
Well,
it was
listen, the
really easy.
feedback from everybody is small talk like this sucks, Josh.
Well,
No, I'm just joking. But
that's mainly what I'm good at. So I guess
no,
it's
I
no use
know.
for me.
I'm just joking. Anyway, let's crack on though, because we're going to be discussing the World Economic Forum. Like, yes, I try not to talk about it, and I wasn't meaning
This is your
really.
favorite subject.
It is a little bit. Well, it's not.
You
I've
love it.
fallen into covering it, and I really don't like the way it comes up every January. Everyone gets obsessed with it, but I end up doing stuff on it. And I guess the reason we've revived the topic again is because I kind of got not roped, that's not a fair way of saying it, but I ended up partnering up with Michael Schellenberger on a piece about WEF. And it went kind of viral because it got over 7 million views on Twitter because Michael is obviously involved in the Twitter files.
Yeah.
And seems to have the ear of a certain dude, I don't know what his name is, who has a few followers on Twitter. So he started responding to Michael's very good Twitter thread about it, and yeah, so suddenly like loads of people are aware of me a little bit more than they were. I had to set up a Substack because Michael writes on Substack, and I had to set up a profile, but I'm not on Substack. And yet people signing up to my Substack, which is not as I've put it very clearly. I don't have a Substack. So don't join me on Substack. I don't write on Substack. I write on my own blog, the-blindspot.com. Very confusing because of the dash, but sadly the blindspot.com was taken due to, I guess, some sort of blind company owns it. One day it'll be mine. But for now, I'm not on Substack. I'm on The Blind Spot, but I do have a newsletter, so free one. Do sign up for that. But it was really fun. And Elon did like answer. He made some very funny comments. Amongst them that, well, he put up a poll today, I think, as well, about whether the World Economic Forum should control the world.
I think that was a couple days ago, but yeah, like there's a lot of answers on it too. Like a lot
No,
of people
I
have
thought it
answered.
was
Was
today.
it today? I don't. By the way, I think Isabella, you can use Substack for the website, the main domain of it, and also all that Substack does is manages the subscription stuff.
No, so this is actually, it can do that now, but when I was deciding to go into independent, they were really reluctant to do white labeling of this sort. So I was
see, like Barry Weiss is white labeled, I think.
She is there, but you see, at the time I was talking to them about it, And they were very much, oh, no, we really discourage it. We don't really want to do it. We find it doesn't work that well. And I was like, well, I don't really want to have a Substack URL. And I said to them, would it be possible to just do, like, are you offering any white labeling options? And because it would be quite good to have it be powered by Substack. But at the time they weren't so keen. So I went with WordPress, and now I'm all set up there. But in the interim, they've now clearly, and Michael Schellenberger has also just launched Public. So he's now, but I'm not sure if that's on a white label or not. Anyway, but the point is that you can do it now, which is a bit annoying, but it's fine. It's got all the same functionality, and they don't. And I think it's a little more cost effective the way I've done it.
Well, my guess is that Substack will probably also have a plugin to WordPress at some point. They might even already do it so that you could manage WordPress or subscriptions there. Then they don't yet, but they probably will.
They will, I guess, yeah, because eventually they're going to have to, like, I would imagine so. But anyway, hopefully next week, I did ask Michael if he would come on our show that has next to no followers. Hi, all 10 followers.
12.
Small but discerning audience. Hopefully he'll come on next week, but we won't talk about WEF next week if he comes on. If Michael comes on, I think it'd be really good to talk, because he's big into Nordhaus and the Green Revolution, and he writes about renewables, and he's been doing a lot of stuff on how the organic thing killed Sri Lanka. So we can talk about, like, much more than just whether WEF is a grift. So I think we'll focus on WEF and corporatism. I also thought it'd be cool to talk about the BoJ, because that's a big story. So that's where we're going to focus on today. Josh, Great. What is your key question?
Well, I mean, I know that you love the Davos stuff, so you like watching it, and I think the central question, the sort of transgressive question on both sides is, does WEF even matter?
No, and that's the big story this week. So
that's what I think too, by the way. I think that it doesn't matter, and that, like, all of this fear of, like, what they're doing, I think that they are completely powerless, and all they do when they go to Davos is show how stupid they are.
So I think this is the big story, and I want this podcast to be information rich as well as just a bit of a gab fest. So everyone is saying, for the first time, I think, for a while, that this is the death of Davos, because this year's conference isn't that well attended. A lot of G7 leaders have snubbed it. Olaf Scholz, the German chancellor, is one of the few to attend. I think Zelensky's wife has been there, but other than that, it's been pretty light on the ground. Davos claims, well, the WEF claim that it's one of the most, I think they've got the most delegates ever, but it's the quality of the delegates that matters. And I've been thinking about this. Hi, Praxis. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming. I'm interacting with our dear viewers.
Our viewer. Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm getting used to when we actually go paid subscription, whatever. What do you call it? Super chat. It's free for now. But yes, so I think this is a really big story, because there are three fundamental issues with the forum. One is the fact that Klaus Schwab, who created the forum in 1971,
is 171.
He is 171. It's a great coincidence. He happens to also be 171, which means he's looking to his succession. But there is a massive sort of question mark over the succession, because it's so intimately connected with Klaus that the power struggles. It's very much like the fall of Rome. When he passes away, if and when. And he may be, like, he's I think he's 84. I'm going to double check, fact check. How old is he? Klaus.
While you're doing that as well, you said something this week that blew my mind.
What?
You probably don't know this. You gave me the figure of how much revenue the WEF makes.
Oh, yeah.
I can't believe it's that low.
Oh, really? Interesting. Well, yeah. It's like Twitter. It's very similar to Twitter, actually. So they do make money, but a lot of the money they make is absorbed on the sort of privileged cabal that run WEF in terms of their expenses. We don't know. I mean, so we found out that the average partnership is now about between 120,000 francs and 850,000 francs, which is roughly the same in dollars. So just under $1 million to be a member. Membership doesn't guarantee you anything, but I suspect it gives you some influence over whether or not you will be in a panel. The forum's spokespeople denied that it buys you a right on a panel. So what are you really getting for that money? There's no sponsorship at the forum. It's entirely neutral. But of course, if you are at the forum, you will have peripheral advertising in your vision, because immediately outside the conference there is private. It's an entire free-for-all. Anyone can set up shop and put up banners or whatever. So advertising is everywhere. But in the actual inner sanctum, there is no advertising. So you're literally just getting access into it's a corporate access sort of model where corporates will pay for access to politicians who mostly don't pay. And Klaus creates a sort of clearing system between all of these, and it's supposed to be neutral ground. And in 1971, when they set themselves up, the mandate was very clear. It was about being a neutral platform that facilitated, communication and exchange of views, and it was very much focused on economic processes, managerial, like all the managerial administration stuff that Klaus had learned at Harvard, and he was importing it into Europe. And the mission was about including as much, being very inclusive, and it was very inclusive for a long time. And I think the best analogy for the forum, as well as being a blockchain, as I've said before, is actually that it was the first incarnation of Twitter, because it was a platform, a neutral platform where anyone could go. And Klaus provided this neutrality factor. But of course, over time, as with Twitter, the influence, if something's neutral, you immediately want to influence it. And the higher the caliber of people attending, the bigger the dividends and rewards from subtly influencing it. So Klaus, on the other hand, has always been very committed to maintaining a dialogue with almost everyone. And that's why in the last 5 years or so, you've seen everyone at Davos, from Vladimir Putin to Xi Jinping to Jair Bolsonaro, even like controversial figures like Justin Trudeau. So so he's very open if he passes away soon. I guess I just throw a comment. Yeah, that's right. He's not going to live forever. I doubt he's going to live forever.
Isabel, you made it funny.
Oh, somebody says you look ill. That's not.
Yeah, because I'm like, see, look.
You look alive. You look, yeah, back but when you go back, you're a little bit. You look a bit peaky. So it started off like Twitter, neutral, wanting to improve relations, communications between everyone. And in fact, one of Klaus's early investments was in a big teleconferencing system, which he then ended up selling to Publicis, I believe it was. And that's how the Schwab Foundation got its original endowment, because at the time he got a lot of heat for doing for-profit investments with the forum's money. The Wall Street Journal, I think, ran a big story about it, and the criticism prompted the founding of the Schwab Foundation, which now supports all sorts of good causes, right? But what we were trying to get to the bottom of was how, the little bit of money that they do have, how do they invest it?
Do you like Klaus? Is he like a guy you kind of respect, or is he a crazy, like, power hungry weirdo?
So a lot has been made of his German heritage, and that his father may have what?
The German people do have a history.
Well, a lot has been made of this history, Josh. But I don't think that's fair, because I think it's rare to find a German who doesn't have a connection to, who, the N-word. I mean, Nittler. At the time, like, quite a few of them were Nazis, right? So it's about how high the ranking, how high in the ranking they were, that really matters. And even then, I don't think it's fair to judge the children by, the actions of their parents in what was clearly a massive sort of delusion, like not a delusion, but like, you know, obviously some sort of psychological episode on a mass formation basis, right? So I don't think it's fair. I think the Nazi stuff is kind of irrelevant, and you should park it in a different camp. Like if you want to critique WEF, it's important to make serious criticisms of it, and I don't think that's a serious one.
I think you're right. And by the way, Cardinal Ratzinger, former Pope Benedict, had a similar problem. He was highly respected in the church, and you know the main critique is that as an old guy, he was part of the Nazi youth. Like, okay, you know, like everybody in Germany at that time. So yeah, I think you're right. So divorcing the critique of Nazi connections that everyone likes to throw out against Klaus. What do you think of him otherwise? Like, is he? Because
So
I have a weird impression of him. You know, like he's a weird seeming dude.
I have met him because he interviewed me. I think I've told this story before. I was approached to join them to run their internal blog, and you know,
have been writing "Own Nothing and Be Happy."
Well, actually, that story came out of what would have been the thing that I was managing. But it was also a guest submission by a Danish MP, I believe it was. And I think this is, you see, I see it as them being incredibly naive about how the internet works. And this is based on my own experience, which is that they were starting a blog. They wanted to be super engaging, and they wanted to emulate, you know, like Alphaville to some degree, where I used to work at the FT.
So some person
But
writes "Own Nothing and Be Happy."
Huh?
Like, let's put it up. Let's see. Maybe it's an interesting thing. And they put it up.
No, but seriously, this is really
everyone
serious.
Points at them and says they said it, and they go, "We didn't say that. We didn't say that." It was like, it's on your blog.
No, but but exactly. So this is all about incompetence and public relations own goals. Because what I realized very early on is, and this is why I didn't join them, is because they wanted all this freedom and they wanted to put challenging content up and they really wanted it to be engaging. But it soon became clear that to put anything up on the website that was in any shape or form exciting, it had to be signed off about through thousands of people. But
your impression that they were trying to, like, they were allowing a conversation to happen on the site then? That was the goal, was like they were just kind of throwing it up there and be like, here's an idea from a world leader, like, discuss.
Well, not only that, so anything original, it became clear I would have no voice on it because my voice was it wasn't about my voice. The voices of the members were more important than the voices of the blogging staff, right? The blogging staff were just administrators, and therefore anything in our voice would have to be signed off by about a committee of about 1,000 people and bureaucrats, right? But also what would trump our voice would be a submission from like a head of state or whatever, right? And we would have very little power to say no, we don't want that, because there was a hierarchy of influence in the system, and the blog was going to reflect that. So when a Danish MP puts up a thing that she thinks is going to be delightful and exciting, and I would imagine it's a sort of gross naivety that they think, oh, this is like pushing, you know, the FT would put something like this up and it wouldn't get any bite back. But that's what happened. And I think
it would be labeled on the FT as editorial. It would be some person's like
yeah, and it would be an op-ed. Whereas I think there was a confusing, like, people don't really understand the purpose of the WEF blog. Is it supposed to be a news platform? Is it supposed to be like a project syndicate with thought pieces? Because it's all kind of mer content, and nobody, so it doesn't know its place. And this is where the confusion and the PR confusion has come from, in my opinion. And so when they took it down, and Michael Schellenberger was right, I think, to point out that this distraction story they've created to explain themselves, that actually it was, some 4chan platform turned it into a conspiracy. That was a nonsense too, because the content was real. It was really genuinely put up on the website.
It was there. Yeah, it was very fucked up.
The fact that 4chan picked it up, I mean, that's a different thing, but it wasn't sourced from 4chan. Like, the spin was sourced, but frankly, all they did was they amplified some content that was provocative and naturally going to upset people, because people don't like the idea of being told they can't own anything. And maybe that sort of ideology passes in elite circles because they've got so much that the idea of owning nothing is kind of quite liberating.
Well,
But
I think
when
it's
you have
more than that.
nothing,
I think it's more than that, Isabella. Like, okay, I'm seeing some chats here. So Maddie M says maybe Klaus, lauding the Chinese model of control might worry some people. And yeah, I don't know what he said about Chinese authoritarianism, but when I read "Own Nothing and Be Happy," I personally live my life that way. It's a very appealing and good way to live your life. You should own nothing. There's almost nothing you should, and the reason you shouldn't own anything is actually very simple. It's because everything has a depreciation curve. So if you can amortize the depreciation curve rather than taking the risk on yourself, you can have someone else take on the risk of the ownership, and you can amortize the depreciation curve and basically pay for the depreciation. You win. That's how you get rich. That's how you stay rich. So like that's actually a really good concept, but I refuse to be told I can't own anything.
And that's the problem. And not only that, you're in a position where you can see the luxury, the benefit of not owning anything, because there comes a point when you've got, assets like houses can be a burden on you. Like, oh my God, the roof is leaking, this and that. Sometimes like the idea of
my third house, the roof is leaking, and in my second house, the toilets are all broken.
Exactly. Jesus Christ, so annoying. But
I mean, I'll give you a good example. This week, I mean, I was thinking about like talking about vacations. I do amortize my toilets. Thank you, man. I have it on a spreadsheet. I give 5 cents a paycheck to my toilet. I was thinking about it. I've thought a lot about buying like an RV for me and my wife. We just get in the RV. We can go anywhere. We can camp. And it just seemed like a really good idea. And, I'd probably use it 2, maybe 3 times a year for some, fun. And it's going to cost me, between $50,000 and $90,000 and whatever, and whatever. So this was a thing I thought, and then like I find a site that like actually lets you rent really nice RVs for, I don't know, maybe $500 to $1,000 a week. And I was like, why would I buy an RV if I can do that? I'm going to use it 3 times a year. I'm going to pay $3,000 versus like whatever.
Yeah,
I'm
but
going
it's
to have
a
to
bit gross when you
buy it.
think about what people do in their RVs, maybe.
Well, Isabella, I don't think about those things when I rent.
Yeah. Look,
Win
own
some
your
hacks.
own
You own your own
Bitcoin.
Bitcoin. Yeah, win some. I think that the point is that like the only thing that you can really own that matters is the value that you hold, right? I don't want to rent Bitcoin. That's not something, but like Bitcoin or dollars or whatever it is that you have that is your medium of exchange allows you to own nothing except money and be happy. And if you, again, like that, like I said, this is how you get rich, is literally trying to own nothing. And the nothing part is hyperbolic because you own the money, right? And be happy. That's how you get rich. This is how it is.
Well, this is what Elon is doing. Like Elon has famously said that ownership of assets is a vector of attack or something. I can't remember. And he rents everything, right? He doesn't own any houses, or at least
there's no reason to for that. Like unless you are building a giant portion of your portfolio as a real estate empire, and you have that risk hedged out and understood. Like there's no reason to do it.
So yeah, exactly. So but the problem is with that messaging is that if you have nothing and you are genuinely very poor, you can't accelerate people through the wealth curve. I once did a post years and years ago on Alphaville. I called it the evolution of the wealth curve, and the principle is that the richer you are, the more inclined you are towards philanthropy and wearing fruit of the loom T-shirts, because assets, like there's only so many luxurious dinners you can have, and after a while, so it's the nouveau riche that really spend their money. And then generational fruit of the perfect generational wealth, like the old money, doesn't. And this is very clear in Switzerland, because in Switzerland you can really differentiate the nouveau riche from the old money. And the old money is very it doesn't flash its cash. It usually they're very humble in how they dress, and there's not that sort of brash attitude.
It's actually interesting. I think that there is something to be said for kind of going through the wealth curve, because like I think when you're poor, you own everything that you have, everything, right? Your car, you're probably kind of renting it because you're paying it off, but like everything you have, like you're buying. Middle class, you start owning a little bit less. I think the wealthy don't own a lot, like as a relative portion of their value, right? For the most part, they're renting most of their stuff. I think that just ends up being what is true. So a message like this, like own nothing and be happy, is in fact something that like a rich person would conclude.
See this, yeah, exactly. And I think so that's why the piece was naive. And yes, it
John
was
says
hijacked.
Elon isn't a role model for appropriate capital allocation. I think you're right. I think holding a majority of your wealth in Twitter accidentally after a court nearly like forces you to do it is not a great capital allocation strategy. But I'm no Dave Ramsey.
Look, I think fundamentally it was a naive post, and yes, it was hijacked by a certain demographic that wanted to embarrass the WEF, and it succeeded. And then, but the error they made is they took it down, right? And they took it down without leaving any explanation for why they took it down, which is just schoolboy error. Like if you take down a previously published piece at a newspaper, it just looks wrong. At a minimum, you have to say we took this down because of legal risk, or we took it down because we don't agree with it anymore, or you have to leave a note. But if you go to the old URL at the website, it's just like a 404 error or whatever. And that was wrong. And of course, because they took it down, and I know the reason they took it down is because the MP was being trolled and abused and harassed on Twitter. So they did it to try and stop the harassment. But I think that, and that's fair enough. I can see why they wanted to do that. And they did that from a protective standpoint. But it created the Streisand effect, and now it's like notorious. And sadly, even if, the irony is they didn't take it down because they were embarrassed of the content. I don't think they distanced themselves from the content. It's just that they were trying to protect the MP.
What level of conspiracy is there here? Because the thing is, I think the thing that people worry about is the idea that these like rich people, these elitists, they're not just elites, but the elitists go to a place like Davos. They talk, and then a bunch of them go back to their home countries and start implementing policies or like advocating policies like shareholder capitalism, which
Right.
is idiotic back in their country. And it always happens like they go in January. Their wee-wees get really hard about these concepts, and then they come back to America, and then the CEO of like, I don't know, Salesforce starts talking about it in February as if like his brain has fallen out of his head, So like what level of conspiracy is there, and is that just a display of weak-mindedness by elitists, or what's the deal?
I think the whole thing has mutated over time, and I think it's now very removed from the core values, which were focused around sort of, like I said, this idea of improving the state of the world, encouraging collaboration, consensus, and moving all different sorts of parties to the economic sort of equilibrium, right? It was a neoliberal model because I guess Klaus was influenced by Harvard, and it was a technocratic neoliberal model, right? And the idea was we can, through the market mechanism, by enforcing the market mechanism, all sorts of people, we can bring about and improve the state of the world. And we can achieve all the other, like all the bits that the market mechanism doesn't solve. We can get around them through consensus formation and achieving new norms, right? But Klaus was very specific in the Davos Manifesto. It was supposed to be neutral. So all stakeholders were supposed to be granted access. And this is really important because I think what's happened over time is that the externalities of pushing neoliberalism everywhere started to bite back on them. And their response was, well, we've got to do something about it. ESG was born out of that paranoia. It's like, oh, we're not the good citizens we thought we were. There's something weird going on with like pushing new like market mechanism on everybody and trying to force it. There are these externalities associated with putting profits before people, right? ESG then came to the table, but rather than actually solve these problems, they didn't want to give up on the neoliberal side of it. So they ended up pushing non-profit objectives through the market. So that's the point of ESG. ESG isn't just about abandoning the for-profit principle. It's about telling people that you can achieve profit if you do these noble things, because it'll come back, in the long term, it'll all benefit your portfolio, right? And so there is this sort of, it's very similar to crypto. It's like, don't believe, like, there is no logical for-profit reason to buy this token. There's no logical for-profit reason to buy this ESG stock right now. It's not making any money. But if you hold it for long enough, it will return, right? And in the meantime, if we get enough
why would it return?
If we get enough people to move into it, we'll have a capital return until profitability.
But that's not how that works. That's just not how that's not how capital allocation works.
No, but that's the ESG. That's how it works. Is that it's a pump, and Davos became, as a result of that,
Isabella, it's fundamentally illiberal, right? And it's problematic because it is a pump, right? Which is very different than crypto, but it's a pump.
But the very key point here, Josh, is that it's not just the fact that they were pushing neoliberalism. The neoliberalistic model that they were forwarding was actually advancing technocratic bureaucracy. So the system elevated bureaucrats and technocrats, and therefore it was always skewed when it went to the ESG system to favoring goals that satisfied and rewarded bureaucrats, because bureaucrats don't vote for non-bureaucratic outcomes, right? They want more rents, and they want more, they want more stuff that rewards their bureaucracy, right? And that's the fundamental, and that's where the authoritarianism comes in, because you're not listening to any electorate or any feedback other than the corporate.
But I want to say about ESG real quick is like what seems to be illiberal about it in particular, and also non-neutral, is it is the acceptance of a number of premises that are not prima facie true, right? Am I using all those words correctly? They're not English, so no, I'm not. They're not, but they're not true. Like they aren't fundamentally true. They're not on their face true, right? And like, to me, that seems highly illiberal. It seems anti-scientific. It seems highly problematic from an academic standpoint. It accepts all of these very problematic worldviews that I don't think that they are absolutes. So, one of the things I think is important to believe is, like, where does the value of a stock come from? Well, it can come from a pump, but that's temporary. Where the value of a stock is long-term is the belief in future cash flows, right? The net present value of future cash flows. And I think mathematically that is true. That is what the value of a stock is and will always be. So if you believe that you can get stocks to go up just by getting people in, it comes with this other side of the belief that you will sell at the top and dump on those people that don't believe that stocks are the net present value of future cash flows.
That's why it's a grift. That's why it's a grift, because you're selling the idea that if you invest in this, there's going to be positive outcomes for everybody. But actually, the chances are there won't be, and the early adopters of whatever portfolio will be the winners. So that's why I liken it to a lot of the crypto stuff, because it really emulates it. And they're hoping that by the time people realize it's a pump, that there will have been enough capital allocated to that concept or whatever it is to have forwarded it to profitability. Tesla is a great example.
That's not how profitability works. It's just not how. It's like
no, Josh, I disagree, because Tesla is an example of that. Tesla needed like 10 years of like subpar, well, not negative revenues, effective. What was it? Not pre-revenue, but like pre-profit environment. To really,
accounting scams.
And accounting scams, all sorts of grifting, until it reached the sort of escape velocity
from one's own cousin.
Right, but that's why I say it is very similar. But the idea is that finally, eventually, achieves profitability.
Maybe,
and it will have been worth it. Amazon is the same. All of these big technocracies, and
it's very likely that Tesla gets unseated by every other car company that's building the exact same cars now.
Yes,
and they would have built them. Maybe it would have taken 3 more years or 4 more years, but electric cars were coming.
Well, well, we don't know, because the reason electric cars have been favored is due to the bureaucracy, and this is why, like, there might be a better solution out there that we will never know about,
You'll
because
never know. You'll never know because of subsidies. Like it
because
might
the
be that the best
subsidies skewed
solution,
the
by the way.
market, because what ESG is, it's a form of like condoned market manipulation. That's basically what
But
it is.
yeah, but how do we know that the best option for cars wasn't the Toyota Prius? How do we know? Like
We
that's
don't.
it, and
That's
it's
the
it's
thing.
super it's super ridiculous to think that like we will ever get to a world where you actually end up with like peak efficiency if what you're doing is manipulating
But
the
also,
way in
Josh,
which
what the ESG people don't realize, and I think it's taken them a while to realize this, is that two can play the game of ESG and stock manipulation. It's all, they thought they would get momentum if they got their mates at all the, investment houses to, forward to back, for example, WEF's own
and
investment.
now there are anti ESG funds.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
look, so Webb's own investment portfolio is managed by a company that is headed by Al Gore, right? So that's like the circularity of it. That's Al Gore goes to Webb. He hears Klaus has some money. They talk up. It's the same. It is the same concept as crypto, in the sense of you have all the propaganda networks pushing the idea, and then Al Gore heads it. He sits on the advisory board, and suddenly everyone is quids in. But you're right in the sense that what were you saying? Sorry, I've forgotten.
Which part?
Just now. You
Oh,
said
I was
we're
just saying, like it is a grift. Like the presumption that you're going to get to peak efficiency by like making these selections is very dumb, and it works for so long. So again, Tesla might work. Tesla might absolutely work. Maybe even like for a number, maybe 10 years, we continue to rape the children in lithium mines of their future health, and maybe that's what we do. And then comes a point where we're like, oh, we don't have enough lithium. Oh,
Yes, so there are always
goodness.
externalities. And the funny thing is, ESG is a response to the externalities, but because the targets are set through bureaucrats, right, like it's a market manipulation, which will have even more externalities. And of course, the
But
blind
why
spot,
why do the best ideas not rise to the top? Like, look, why is it that someone like William Nordhaus, who says that basically carbon credits are a good way forward, mainly because they're neutral, ideologically neutral, right? That's essentially the idea. Is like if we're wrong about climate change, that's fine. They're ideologically neutral. It's not a big deal. Like we can it's just money. So like if we're wrong, it's not a big deal. People are paying basically the possible damage that they're doing to the environment. Why is that fairly obvious reality, which is that governments manage externalities, not the solution that WEF would implement? Instead, they do this like top down, fully idiotic. We are going to pick what the world looks like and turn it into our like little Lego house and get these activists on boards that really undermine the credibility of the so-called elitists.
yes, exactly. So I've been distracted by the fact that in the my dyslexic brain, I wrote gift instead of grift. Ugh. Sorry, and I had 30 minutes to correct it, and I didn't, because I'm now in Twitter blue. Sorry.
And
Apologies.
I know. You were saying earlier like Schellenberger is a Nordhaus guy as well,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't divulge to you that I also am.
Well, I know that, but
You
yeah,
do,
I
okay.
think it's an interesting fascination to have. But one of the key points with this bureaucratic influence, I think, is because this is the undoing of WEF, and it's very analogous to what happened with Twitter. Twitter was brought down, as Taibbi and all those guys have been reporting. It meant well in the beginning, just like WEF did, but it was brought down by its own internal bureaucracies. Systems they brought into play to deal with spam and bots and scammers, right? And then those tools, which were used to de-amplify certain voices and elevate other voices, were then sought out by opportunists who saw a really useful benefit from being able to influence that distortion of the neutrality, right? And and I think the forum has followed exactly the same paradigm, because what am I trying to say? It's followed in the same footsteps, because it too had to, enforce more and more bureaucracy, membership fees, so to be profitable, it had to cover its core costs. So it had the Twitter Blue before anybody. That's the membership, right? And if you pay the membership, you don't have advertising. Hence, although I suspect Elon won't necessarily enforce that, but neutrality of WEF, there's no advertising. Everyone pays their dues and they get equal access in theory. But there was influence, because people there were different tiers within WEF. There were different areas of private and then public sessions, and then who had Klaus's ear, or i.e. the ear of Yoel Roth, right? That's the equivalence, had more power than somebody who didn't have his ear. And so Klaus then became the one that was determining whose voice would be amplified during the WEF sessions and whose wasn't. And then he bought into the ESG stuff, and he thought it was his own idea, but actually it was just coming from all these people who were influencing him. And then he became that was the undoing of it. And then in the process, he started to also completely distance himself from the reality of digital influence. And rather than accept that digital influence zones also need representation in the forum, he chose to basically ignore them, anyone who was critical of his regime, because that's disinformation. And that's when it fell apart. So I wrote a column for Unheard today, arguing that the replacement of, when Klaus passes away or retires, very likely the forum will die, but it won't be like Elon Musk buying it out or whoever.
It won't go away. It just, nobody will go there anymore. They'll
Nobody will go there because no one will have it. Like, people have invested in influencing Klaus.
Is
right?
Klaus's death? Oh, that's interesting. So people okay, but is Klaus's death the end of ESG and the end of a lot of this BS?
It could be, because what I think will happen is it's like Game of Thrones. Klaus will disappear, and there will be new people with different biases that the system will have to influence again. That will cause total chaos. So from a creative disruption point, it'll be easier to start a new neutral. You'll either get the fragmentation effect, like with Parler and Gab and Truth, or you will get some sort of challenger that is genuinely neutral, which will include digital spaces. And that's why I argued in my column today that the natural successor to Klaus, if we were going to revert to the original vision of WEF, would be more someone like Joe Rogan.
I would like to volunteer for this job, Isabella. I can tell you all the reasons Joe Rogan will fail.
Oh, right, okay. But Joe Rogan, I mean, obviously, it doesn't have to be Joe Rogan, but someone like Joe Rogan, someone who listens to all sides, because that's the beauty of Joe Rogan's show, is that he's fairly like Klaus. He's a listener, and he, in theory, he's open to all sorts of things, and he's creating dialogue, and he's everyone gets their 3 hours with him, whoever they are, and the audiences determine whether his podcast is successful or not. So I think someone like him is more likely to, with huge reach. It could even be Elon. I don't know, probably not Elon. Elon isn't committed enough to neutrality, but he has the reach. So that's my take on it all.
Why is there such a need for this?
Well, Elon tweeted, actually, in his response, he said, oh, well, there's nothing, I think it was something like, oh, the world probably needs some place where there's dialogue between, the elite can have dialogues. And I actually happen to agree with that. Michael Schellenberger doesn't. We discussed this. I shouldn't say too much, but I do, because it's a Rick's Cafe, isn't it? You have to have neutral ground. You have to have somewhere where you can parlay. Otherwise, you will never have.
Or even après.
Huh?
Or even après.
Après ski, yes. But you do need a kind of cantina. You need somewhere where people can meet in neutral ground.
I think that's a very European belief. And what's really funny is Americans are really obsessed with Europe. I am of the Americentric belief that no one in the world should have access to American elites, and American elites who want to give access to themselves to other people in the world in a way that is anything other than telling them what freedom is. Those people are traitors.
So you don't believe in diplomacy. You don't believe in.
No, I
Oh,
do believe in diplomacy. I just believe that like America got it right and everyone else has it wrong. And when I hear other countries talk about like we are free, and I'm just like, you have no idea what freedom is. Only America figured it out. Only. And other countries could figure it out, but they've chosen not to.
look, if I, that is one view, and you
It's the
know
right view.
you can argue it, but I think
That would be my
even if you
Davos.
are correct, even if you are correct, there are going to be a lot of people who don't agree with you,
Right.
and a lot of cultures that will therefore take offense if America tries to sweep in with its system into their neck of the
Well,
woods,
I don't,
right?
I don't, I don't have any desire. Like, I'm not a, like, I am not in
Neocon,
any way a,
neocon.
a neocon. Well, maybe a little. No, I'm not really a neocon. I'm not a, what's it called when you don't talk to people outside of your country?
Isolationist.
Isolationist. I'm not one of those. Not in any way. But I don't care if other countries take offense at like American liberal values. And I think it's really interesting. Like in America, this is a thing that like liberals in the U.S. like to say, like the rest of the world, it just really hates us right now. I'm like, I don't care. The rest of the world doesn't understand American values. And so anyhow, it's like for me, I think you're right. There needs to be a place for elites to gather. But I think in America, like American elites, particularly I think our senators, need a place where they can actually talk and get along. And in America, I think that is like I think that we have lacked for about 100 years a aristocratic, beneficent aristocratic class, and I think it needs to be brought back because I think you're right in sentimentally that is necessary to a free society, which is very weird. I never would
Well,
have
think
thought that
about,
before.
at the moment, I heard like interviewed Pippa Malmgren, who used to work at the George Bush White House as an economist, senior advisor, right? And one thing she said to me, and I thought it was a very interesting and insightful comment, was that the transparency the transparency requirement creates an environment where most of these elites are paranoid about putting anything on paper because they know that an FOI will immediately, be searchable and findable and embarrass them. As a result, lots of meetings are held where people don't write anything down. And then people can't remember what was said. And it's all this he said, she said stuff. But you imply blah, blah, blah. And actually, just from note taking perspective, that's really bad. Like it's better to be able to take notes and in some sort of environment that is considered to be definitively private. Of course, national security is the only exception which allows for that. And a lot of people think that exception is being abused. But I think so. I agree. I think elites need a private space because otherwise you can't have any conciliatory dialogue, right? If you are warring, like if Zelensky and Putin meet and it's all in like the public eye and every single word is scrutinized, they're never going to be able to make any concessions, right? They're not going to be able to meet any middle ground because all their factions will be holding them hostage to their particular views. So I think you need, especially in a highly, if there's a lot of friction in the world, I think you need that safe space, that private space, but you need a mandate from the people to do it, right? So as long as the people know that this is being done in there and they trust you, that's fine. I don't know. I don't have the solution, obviously, but there needs to be a middle ground because yes, for sure, at the moment, it's only the security agencies that get that privilege and they're not always worthy of it, right? Whereas I think if you elect officials, the people who get the privacy should be elected officials because then if they abuse it, there's some sort of recourse.
Yeah, and I agree.
Oh, well,
I
that's
agree
nice.
with that. I agree with that.
So what do you think in terms of the idea of, ongoing influence or a challenger event? Can you see anything else emerging anywhere?
Yeah, I think that there's stuff going on. Some of these types of events, I'm sure you know about, that are like happening external to something like WEF, and I think that I like look. I think the way like if you think about it, the way that people like this is the Bilderberg group essentially, right?
But
This
it's
is
not the
what
Bilderberg group, because Bilderberg is very different to where.
I understand, but I'm saying that all of these groups are literally they're just conferences, right? They're just conferences that people put on, and then they gain this like sort of notorious reputation, largely because the location the conference is held at is inaccessible to most people. The tickets might be a little bit expensive, whatever the case. So essentially, it ensures. So there are these things that are happening, and they're going to move from WEF or Bilderberg or whatever, and just start moving into like other secret spaces, aren't they? Like,
Well, they won't, because I think that the unique thing about WEF is that it's like Twitter. It's only valuable if everybody comes. And all the challenger events are usually like, Web Summit or something very specific. It's like
challenger event doesn't make any sense. What is that? What is a challenger event?
Well, like any alternative, like high influence event at the moment. Is this
what they refer to them as, challenger
events? No, I've just said that. But like, I'm talking about any other conference. Like, you don't have the critical mass of
and by they
forum, because there's nothing else that's like it where everyone has to be there, like Twitter. Even if you hate everyone there, you still go because that's where everyone is, right? Now, if you have the fragmentation that you've seen with Parler and stuff, that devalues the concept of having a neutral ground where you can see everybody, which is why WEF shot itself in the foot when it stopped, when it started sort of isolating a certain faction of society and looking down on it, because that was, ironically, they needed those people in. It would have been better to invite Joe Rogan and have him head the disinformation panel than Brian Stelter, right?
That blew my mind. That one blew my mind. The fact that they are so blind to the notion that Brian Stelter is one of the biggest purveyors of misinformation that they let him lead the panel discussing misinformation. But the panel itself was terrible, Isabella. I don't know if you watched it. Again, they bought into premises that aren't true. And namely, the premise that they bought into is that misinformation is a right-wing problem in particular, and that the extent to which it's a left-leaning problem, it's at least they're trying to help people.
Yeah.
And that's insane.
Yeah, and I think this is a function of the fact that Klaus has got to a point where he has listened to all these, whoever's in his ear, people who are circling his in his orbit, who want to effectively dispossess him of power in the end, and bought into this idea that if you host that somehow the internet, like disinformation on the internet is, or people who have different views on the internet are different to, say, entertaining Xi Jinping, right? Xi Jinping has very different views to most of the other people at WEF, but we have him anyway. But like we can't possibly tolerate anyone else from the internet space. I think that's the problem. He's differentiated the two, which is ironic because he was a pioneer in his own right in terms of seeing the potential of the web, and he funded these teleconferencing systems. He understood and is a big supporter of the web and the internet. So it's very ironic that he should be undone by like a misunderstanding of the culture of the internet, I think.
Well, does anyone there understand the culture of the internet?
No, I don't think they do. And that's the other thing, because this is why why is it valuable for them to all go there every year? It's because when you're a high official, you are surrounded by sycophants who are mostly telling you what you want to know, what they think you want to know, right? Or trying to influence you in their nefarious ways, right? So you can't really trust people. You become a bit paranoid. WEF is a sort of place where you can hang around with equally influential people and be exposed to other ideas. And these guys are genuinely, they're always behind the curve. You mentioned it yourself. WEF is usually like always wrong in terms of its forecasts and always catching up on stuff that we were talking about years ago.
I see this thing with WEF where they like things will come out of WEF and they're like shareholder capitalism. And I'm like, good luck with that, you dum-dums. Never gonna happen. Not in the US at least. Like, good luck. Good luck trying it. And I see the language of it like seeping into like communications and government or other things. And I'm like, the only people that are accepting this are like white liberal women.
But
like in government positions.
Like Twitter, like the people who like do the virtue signaling on Twitter, the same people who think going to Davos is really important and influencing it. It's because the structure is the same. It's that you've got your power influencers, And then the entire cottage industry of like bots and sycophants and scammers who are trying to influence the influencers, right? That's the same structure. So I think it's very analogous, and I think it's funny that Elon Musk is sort of like now challenging the forum and saying it's irrelevant, because maybe he's right. And I don't think Twitter can replace the forum, because you need those face-to-face interactions, but it's certainly something that enhances, WEF has its own Twitter. It has like this top link thing where like if you're in it, you can message everybody else. It's not public though. It's not like a shared, I'm not sure actually. I've never seen if there's a public dialogue, like a private public dialogue within the system. Maybe there isn't, but it definitely has the means for this network to then stay in touch if they want to. So yeah. Anyway, how much do you know about the idea of corporatism, like as a thing? Because I was quite struck by the fact that when we described what was going on at WEF as corporatism, there was a bit of pushback, because there is a very distinct concept of corporatism being potentially quite good. So
I can unpack the word and tell you what I mean, but I think that like you have a definition. So why don't you just give the definition? And
no, I don't think there is
your definition of corporatism.
Well, I'm interested. What do you think it is? And I'm not trying to catch you out, just because I was educated myself.
When I hear the word corporatism, I just sort of think like rule by corporation, like things that are good for corporations. Like when Disney, the ESG is a good example, right? If corporations accept ESG, and corporations are paying government and whatnot to like influence them, or BlackRock is funding ESG narratives. Like it's just kind of like corporate culture entering the rest of society. That's kind of how I would understand it. So what is the actual definition?
So if you take the strict sort of definition of it, let me get the actual, because I don't want to mess it up. Hang on.
So Davos equals shitcoin casino. Yeah.
So here we go. So there's an element. So it goes back to the sort of Italian idea of fascist Italy. So strictly, corporatism is collective bargaining between unions and employers brokered by the state. So the state, which can either be a democratic state or a totalitarian state, as in Italy, basically, rather than use other channels to influence, like state corporations or state systems, it entrusts corporations to affect the policies of the state, and it allows
it's the state abdicating responsibility and allowing corporations to carry out its desires. In America, for example,
where the state it's very specific, because it's supposed to be a mechanism that is inclusive of like a collective bargaining process between unions and employees, right? So the corporates are not just for profit; they are the internal stakeholders. The employees get a say through these mechanisms that allow for feedback through the system to help everybody. So the perfect example is the FDR corporate town system, right? Which some people believe is a really good model, and a lot of Western writers were actually very, I think, quite. What's the word? Sorry, my brain's a bit lost sometimes. They were quite taken by the idea of Italian corporatism. They liked it, and they saw a lot of virtue in it, because they thought it controlled for the sort of externalities of raw capitalism in a very good way. The problem is that it doesn't allow for any engagement by non-active citizenry. So if you don't have a job, if you're not a managerial class, or you're not involved in a corporation, you have no say in the political system, or there is no other mechanism for you to feed back into the system other than through purchasing products of corporates. And the state can influence the corporations to influence the market, right? So that's corporatism. So the famous example in Italy is something called the battle for grain, which was Mussolini deciding that Italy had to be entirely independent and wasn't to have any imports from anywhere around the world. It had to
Couldn't
be
rely on those Saudi elites for their grain exports anymore.
no, exactly. So they had to be sustainable, and everything had to be domestically
They broke up
produced.
GrainPec.
And that so similar to how ESG now creates incentives for us to drop fossil fuel and then skews the system to allow the economy to maximize renewable energy production. Mussolini did the same with domestic grain. So it incentivized everyone to stop making other like shoes or whatever, and everyone became a farmer to generate grain. And to this day, I think the after effects are still there, but there were really bad repercussions because there were externalities involved with lots of other industries being undersupplied, and people were very unhappy because the system was essentially gamed.
It's not unlike the push for globalization in the 90s, to be honest. Like
Like
in terms
how
of
so?
the knock-on effects, right?
Right. So and this is where I got the pushback, is that I thought it was very similar to Italian fascism, fascist economics, right? But the pushback was that Mussolini's Italy was a nationalist model, whereas obviously the WEF framework, ESG, corporatism, if you call it that, is internationalist and globalist in its agenda. So it doesn't, in theory, it doesn't advance one culture over another. But instead, what it forwards really is the bureaucrats and the rentiers who benefit from the gaming of the system, and so that feeds the bureaucracy.
It is
and
though, right?
more.
Like ESG is pure rent seeking.
Yes.
That's really what it like incentivizes. I mean,
Yeah.
and Tesla's a great model, right? Basically, Tesla's been profitable simply because of government subsidy.
Yes, exactly. So that's why I think I think there's a big parallel between Italian fascism and the WEF stakeholder model. But I can see why people who favor corporatism as a sort of New Deal type framework, which allows for democratic pushback within the system, are upset with that nomenclature because they don't want their system to be, it's very unfortunate in their eyes that corporatism was associated with the fascistic side of things. But I think that's a fair argument to a certain degree. So they would say WEF is not corporatist; it is a neoliberal, technocratic, globalist thing, right? And that's very different because it uses the market mechanism to solve its problems. It doesn't.
Someone's Gekaredin says, how is ESG rent seeking? Got the Tesla example, got more. I mean, I think that all of ESG is not profit motivated. So what the government has and what corporations have is basically this unholy relationship where the government says, you do X and we won't punish you, or we will give you subsidies. So you end up with like weird corporate trainings in order to get money. You end up with like malinvestment. You end up with like energy companies not drilling for oil and relying on subsidies from the government to make up for the costs. So in order to succeed in a world where there's ESG, it requires that companies become rent seeking in order to survive. And what happens is, again, this unholy relationship then moves the corporations from relying on the thing that they should be doing, which is to take risk in a risk model that they have set up for themselves. So like a drilling company should be taking risk in oil exploration or in oil and purchasing of oil fields, etc. But in a model where they're no longer incentivized to do that. Now, in order to like either move past the business model of something like fossil fuels or something like that, they rely on government to basically push them past this like time of non-profitability. And it just causes rent seeking. It requires rent seeking. And the government knows that. And once you've done that, you're no longer really just an independent corporation for the rest of history. Your corporation will now be dependent on governments, which means that you have a scenario where all of these corporations are now too big to fail. You have a scenario where unions are now tied into the government. So if like Shell goes bankrupt, instead of allowing a smaller oil corporation to come up and take their place, all of a sudden the government is going to write them a big check to make sure that they remain solvent. So like it's sort of the elimination of bankruptcy, which is actually a really decent system. that was developed in the United States around railroads for this exact explanation. It's the opposite of rent seeking. The reason that bankruptcy existed is because in railroad times, when railroad companies would become insolvent, banks didn't want to go in and seize railroads because they could do nothing with them, right? So the best people to operate railroads are the people that, in fact, their company, their corporate understanding is to take risk of running railroads, of running like whatever it is that is on the railroads, and making sure that they can be profitable. So what they did is they developed this sort of model of restructuring where you could restructure your debt in order to remain solvent. And it was the banks that took on the risk, right? Whereas if you have government taking on the risk, there's really actually no risk taking that is going on. At least it creates risk taking, malinvestment as well. So that's why.
No, I agree. And I've got a really good example of how that's coming about in the UK, at least. In the UK, we have this concept of EDI, I think it's called, equitable diversity and inclusion. And it's being pushed by the government to the degree that all government contracts now have to have an EDI score. And unless you pass the EDI score, you don't get a contract from the government, right? So every contractor has to apply to these third-party agencies that have popped up everywhere to anoint them with an EDI score. What metrics they use to actually determine this is really, really murky. And it turns out, because there's not enough of them, these corporations are charging an insane amount because there's a huge list of corporates waiting to get these signed off. There's only 10 EDI scores.
Well, it's just Judaism in terms of kosher. It's just a kosher rabbi. Like,
yeah,
you have to have the kosher rabbi coming in and say you slayed the pig correctly.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And you need this score, and we are the only people who can appoint you with this score. And there's not enough of us, so we can charge you £200,000. And I know of a company that when they found, they're like little startup, like the £200,000 for an EDI score is like a huge deal for them. And when they said to their government representative, like, oh, this is really expensive, the government guy was like, oh, well, we'll just pay for it instead. Yeah. We'll pay for it for you.
There you go.
And they were like, well, no, we don't want you to pay for it because it's a waste of money. Like, I don't want my tax dollars going towards like 200,000 for an EDI score. This is absurd. And so to get around the EDI score, the company in question had to have this like very intrusive sort of interview with these two random individuals who had no idea about their business, had no idea about, like, this was like a software business. and they were making absurd sort of like they were statements like, do you have enough blind people in your organization? It's like a team of like 7 people. Like, do you have a blind, like, are your products enabling, the blind? Are they? It's like, it's a software company. Like it doesn't make sense. And this is the weird externality that you get from these, and that's how it ends up being rentierism. I think that's exactly accurate.
Yeah, it requires this unholy alliance. And the bigger problem is that, like, it's a completely arbitrary point of entry, barrier to entry for any company that wants to do something. Like, it's absurd that a small company should have to comply with these restrictions. There's no reason that any company should, but like the reason that they do it is because it's really easy for Amazon.com to pay $200,000 to anybody for anything.
Which is why it enables the incumbent technocracy.
Yeah, you want $200,000 from Amazon? Send them, like, honestly, just send them an invoice, and they'll probably send you a check. And it'll be fraud, but like that's you could probably get them to do it. Like, but if you're a small startup and like you're 7 people, you're paying like, checks every month, you're struggling to make payroll. 200K, maybe you're 6 or 7, you'll have 200K in your bank account, maybe. Unless you're like a VC invested company. But this is like this makes entrepreneurial venture it kills it. It kills innovation. It kills a lot of things.
Right. Of course, the corporatists would say that they're like the pure corporatist concept in its good form is different because it's decentralized. And I think the corporatists, like the purists, see it more as like the medieval guild system, where you have essentially professionals determining their own, how to regulate themselves with guidance from a sort of hands-offy monarch, or it could be a democracy, doesn't necessarily have to be, and that this is fine because it's decentralized and it allows for subgroups to figure out what's good for themselves without too much government intervention. That's why they quite like it and advance it, because they see it as they would say it's a better form of government than sort of the direct democracy mob rule that you sometimes get with referendums or whatever. Like, you have people who are actually informed about their own, subject areas or industries making the decisions. But it's okay because it's decentralized. So like the automakers aren't going to tell the the fashionistas what to do, right? So it's all segregated. But in theory, it's supposed to guard against monopoly. I think in practice,
monopoly is rarely a problem in a competitive atmosphere. That's the thing. Like, government really does enforce monopoly often, and it's a weird situation, because they're also the enforcers of like trying to break them up, because there's a recognition that monopoly is a bit of an externality.
Yeah, and I have to say, like, in its pure form, the corporatist concept, I'm not against. I can see why it's valuable. I mean, I can see why you would want like competing guilds and having mechanisms. But of course,
doesn't capitalism breed that? Like, if that is the most efficient form of capital allocation and profitability, isn't that what will eventually like grow out of a capitalist infrastructure?
Well,
and
in
that's
theory,
not what grew out, so that's clearly not the most efficient.
In theory, yes, and like a good example of that is the kind of the fact that taxi systems all around the world always end up creating small cartels, right?
Sure.
That have self-regulated status, and the state gives them a license, but by and large, they are setting their own prices, and they know what's best, and they have mechanisms to support their workers and whatever. Right. And but then neoliberal technocracy comes in the form of Uber and tries to disrupt that, because they're like, no, the market mechanism is better, and we don't want workers to be protected by any kind of guild type structures. It's not good for the consumer.
Well, but fundamentally, Uber's a bad example, because like what Uber does is Uber basically makes the bet that governments can't enforce their own rules to the effect, and then they come in and they kind of destroy all of that. But like, Uber does this on the back of like, venture capital investment, and the fundamental Uber pitch isn't we are more profitable, it's we will undercharge for taxis by 25%, and that will be how we win the game, and we'll do it by just having a lot of money in our coffers and running a giant burn.
That's why it's market manipulation, and that's why it's more WEF than it is corporatism. Right. That's what the corporatists would say. They would say it's technocratic neoliberalism, which is forcing it, and also it's the relationship that Uber tries to aspire to with the government, which is to create, to get the government to protect their market mechanism, which allows for abusive work practices that don't give power to the employees at all. Corporatists would say, well, our model wouldn't do that, because we would give power to the employees through our guild systems, right? So right. Uber is anti-union, anti kind of like giving, it maintains its monopoly whilst forcing the worker class to operate in a competitive market that is radically competitive. So the workers get no protections, but it gets the maximum protection from the state. So it's the worst of the systems, is what the corporatists would say. And when you call that system a corporatist model, you are mislabeling corporatism, is what they would say.
People are saying that we still have the sound issue where I'm only in the left. That's very weird. I don't know why that is.
Oh, is that you again, being on the left?
That's what it says. It says that I'm only on the left, and
Well, I think, are you secretly signing to people?
No, I'm not. I'm doing Morse code in the other ear.
We'll have to do it. We'll have to do a test to figure out what's going on. So last, before we finish up, how much do you know about what's been going on at the Bank of Japan?
Well, Isabel, this is the first I've heard of the Bank of Japan. I didn't know they existed until this very moment. So nothing.
Well, it's really interesting, and I think it fits into our conversation. So the Bank of Japan, obviously, is the central bank of Japan.
That was my assumption.
And they have been engaged in the longest run of QE ever. Like, they were the first to do QE. Even before we were doing QE, they were doing QE because they had a huge market crash following, it was like in the 90s, right? And they had the famous lost decade, and they intervened in the market, and they were with quantitative processes, and they essentially ended up reducing rates for a very, very long time, initiating what became known as the Japanese yen carry trade, which was adopted by Mrs. Yakamoto. I think was the not Satoshi Nakamoto. Oh, I've messed up the name.
Satoshi Yakamoto.
No. Anyway, there was a Japanese generic name that was applied to this carry trade because everyone was doing it, even your mum. And
wow,
the idea
your mom
was,
jokes.
and the idea was that you could borrow cheap yen and then convert it into domestic currency, because it was cheaper to do it that way. But it created all these other externalities.
Wait, so you get cheap yen.
Yeah, convert it into dollars. Use the dollars
to buy more yen.
No, for corporate lend. Like, so if you want to borrow in the market, if you want to borrow funds for whatever purposes, rather than borrowing dollars, you would borrow yen because it was cheaper interest rate. You just have to convert it. And then because the exchange rates favored, the dollar was always, the dollar was always appreciating. So when it came time to pay it back, you could buy cheap yen again. So that the yen was effectively always being depreciated to some degree relative to the dollar. I hope I haven't messed that up, but that's how I understood it. And yes, there was sort of arbitrages without the lending because it facilitated sort of risk-free arbitrage in some way, which I don't want to mess up, but there was an arbitrage.
So it sounds like the coin clipping.
It possibly
back in the UK, where France had a floating exchange rate, and they just clip the coins in the UK and put them on a boat and go to France and sell them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway, this has been going on for ages, and then all the other central banks were doing negative yields and zero ZERP, whatever. So the yen carry trade got a little bit crowded out because everyone had the same rates. But now, of course, the Western central banks are lifting rates. But Japan is like the one country in the world that still doesn't have massive inflation. And the central bank governor, Kuroda, is defiantly sort of trying to maintain lower rates. It's called, they're calling it yield control. And he's buying, to stop the rates going up, he's continuously buying more and more bonds on the longer side of the bond curve, to the point now that the Bank of Japan basically owns the entire market of Japanese bonds. And the big question in the market is, will this somehow, is it going to break down? Because once you own all the bonds, right, what can you do?
Can you default on yourself?
Well, anyway, it's an interesting situation, and I was just wondering if you had been looking at it, because it's
I hadn't. I'm going to now, though. That's really weird. It's
a fascinating situation, but of course, Japan is a big holder of US debt as well, but domestic debt is almost entirely held domestically as well, so it owes itself.
I was like, it's just default on yourself. Is that fine?
Well, yeah,
it seems fine. If you own all your debt, you own nothing.
Am I
right?
You own nothing when you're happy.
We're giving ourselves money.
But they have a terrible kind of demographic issue because there's too many old people, not enough young people.
Mm-hmm.
The bonds are supposed to be sort of long-term investments, but they haven't been yielding anything. So you
know what I learned about this week, by the way, speaking of bonds? The consul debt.
Oh, yeah.
Consul bonds.
Yeah. Consul.
You know what these?
Consul. Yeah.
So I didn't know this, but apparently, like Wall Street, like consul bonds were issued like hundreds of years ago by the UK, and they still pay out. You can register them with the Exchequer.
Mrs. Watanabe, that was it. Thanks, Practice.
And so apparently, like apparently a lot of like Wall Streeters will buy
Right.
these console bonds so that like they're getting $1 from the UK every year or something like that, or every quarter to like just laugh at them because it's a debt from like the Revolutionary War or something. Like,
Well, Britain famously paid back its wartime consuls not long ago,
oh,
maybe about, I don't know,
2015.
8 years ago or something. But it's a perpetual coupon in theory until you pay off the principal. But usually by the time, I mean, I think I read somewhere that there's a pattern, like a distressing pattern, where by the time a nation decides to pay off its old perpetual debt, it's usually the time that a new war kind of emerges somewhere, and then they have to issue more perpetual debt. But this feeds into my plan for, to rescue the UK, because they could issue new consuls and call them Elizabeth bonds, and maybe strike them as NFTs. Tap wouldn't. I mean, who wouldn't buy a Queen Elizabeth NFT perpetual coupon?
I wouldn't.
Oh, because you're not British.
No, because NFTs are just receipts.
I'm just joking. It doesn't have to be an NFT. It could be a bond.
Also, no, I don't buy British things.
Yeah,
I'll buy a gun.
Have you been following the Meghan and Harry story?
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's been hard to find. It's been hard to find information on them. But yeah, I've been doing what I can to dig it up.
So what do you think? Do you think were you upset by the revelation that Harry was punched or hit by William and broke his necklace, fell into a dog bowl?
It's so dumb. Like I like that sounds like brothers. Like, if the idea that brothers wouldn't fight, particularly physically, it's so bitchy. Like it like that's what brothers do. They punch each other.
Yeah, well, exactly, the whole thing. I mean, but I understand that in America, where you're from, Harry
David says
has the upper hand.
Isabella, David in the chat says that Meghan and Harry are just such private people. He's right. They're just very private. Like we can't find info on them. It's I've looked and looked, and it's just very difficult. But I think I've dug up some stuff that I'm compelled by.
Have you watched the Netflix documentary?
I watched some of it. It was really hard.
It's hard to watch.
Well, hard to care.
Hard to care.
And you're watching and you're like, I don't think any of this is true. I'm very skeptical of everything that those two say, and it's very weird. Like it's just, I heard some quotes from his new book Spare. He seems like kind of a guy who never understood the weird and very privileged place that he had in life and the opportunity that it afforded him. And, I think that he could have said no to the life and he could have done it with grace, but instead he did it with Meghan Markle.
But I hear that in America, people they are winning the PR war in America, because in the UK, William is winning. Like everyone hates Harry here, but I heard he's taken America much like the Beatles took.
No one likes him here.
Really?
No. It's like look, the European press, the British press, is enamored with leftist media, and in so reporting everything that leftist media reports in the U.S., you guys think that you're being neutral. I've seen this so many times. Like I'll talk to Brits and they're like, "Oh, I know what happened with Donald Trump. I'm a neutral arbiter. I'm from Britain. This is how they talk there." That's my best British accent.
I didn't realize that was a British accent. Now
that's a British accent. So like, and all these Brits, like Peter McCormick in Bitcoin says this all the time. He's like, I'm a neutral party. I am not from America. I can parse the information better than you can. And I'm like, no, you guys are literally listening to the BBC repeat like CNN talking points that have been filtered through like 7 layers. And I hear the British media report it as if it's fact. I'm just like, what? So they're not winning the PR war here. Again, liberals seem to like them, I guess, maybe, but for the most part, they don't really care. The right is making incessant fun of them. Nothing like that joke there that they're such private people. That's become a big joke in the U.S. where everyone's like, oh, I'm finding, like, I went online to look for, there was a great tweet last week. I went online to look for information on Harry and Meghan. Wasn't able to find any. Can someone send, link me to some good sources? And the joke is, they've been on Oprah, they've been on Netflix, they've got a book, they've like done 14 interviews, and nobody believes them. Everyone had a very low opinion of Meghan before she left. They have a lower opinion of her now. Men in America think that Harry is a giant cuckold who like gave up his guns. He has historically important firearms that he like sold on Craigslist.
Didn't know that bit, but interesting.
Yeah. Like family heirlooms. He's like unloading them because she is making him do it and like requesting it. And it's like America's like, what? Like, if my dad gave me a gun, it's not leaving this house. Like, it's mine. That's like an heirloom.
Yeah. Well, look, I definitely am not a fan of either of them. I think he's obviously been under the influence of Meghan. I think in their world, their truth, they see themselves as victims.
The bits
Meghan,
I've heard.
Meghan, come on, like she claims she didn't know like what she was getting.
It's absurd,
into.
pure absurd. I didn't even know he was a prince. I didn't know what it was like. I was just
No,
like, I
that,
met
like,
him out of the blue.
Make my life a nightmare. Even though like everyone knew about Diana, like I mean, she's either incredibly ignorant or
there's all sorts.
apparently she does know how to Google. Because
have you looked at the book? Like, there's moments where he describes things. Like, he took her to Diana's grave and he walked away and he's like, get to know her. And Meghan sat there, and then like he comes back and he sees that she's praying at Diana's grave. I'm like, this girl like ran a grift. It was, it's hilarious to like hear this. But what's funny is I have not read the full book, but I've heard a number of excerpts. And the excerpts I've heard have made Charles, King Charles, really sound like a good, compassionate father.
You're right. Actually, that was quite an interesting insight. I think Charles has been, because he was always under the shadow of the Queen.
Gekkeridden says shame about the guns. And by the way, there's a dude out there who has guns owned by the Prince of England, who, when he bought them, had no idea at first that they were owned by them, which tells me that they were sold at a market price.
Oh.
Those are very valuable guns.
Okay, well, there you go. You see, we there's a market element even to this story. So, do you know who Jeremy Clarkson is, by the way?
Jeremy Clarkson?
Have you heard of him? There's a show called Top Gear and a derivative called
Grand Top Gear. I've seen that show.
So, but the American version or the original? Because
I think I saw the UK version. I've YouTubed it a couple times because people were telling me about it years ago. So
Jeremy Clarkson is you either love him or hate him in this country. I quite like him. I think he's funny, and I always like Top Gear. But he has this column. He has a couple of columns, and he always is very, cutting is the word. But he's also very funny, and it's a joke. And his reputation is just being cantankerous and annoyed with everybody. So he made this joke about Meghan.
He's a Simon Cowell of UK.
No. He's funny, unlike Simon Cowell. Anyway, so he made this joke comparing Meghan to, or making sort of throwaway comment about it being like that moment in Game of Thrones where they shout shame and maybe throw a bit of feces at her, right? He made some sort of comment about that, but it was clearly a joke. But Meghan got very upset, and then there was this huge backlash, and he has now been cancelled. So Amazon just cancelled his second show, so that I think they're going to air the next series, but they're not going to do any more. He apologized, and that was
why do y'all Brits apologize for everything? Why not own this shit? You're like, yeah, throw feces at her. That's funny.
Well, he apologized, and then that wasn't good enough. So then he apologized again. And then Meghan basically said, no, I don't accept the apology because he's got too much baggage and he's been such a shitbag for in so many different areas, not just in me. I'm not gonna accept the apology. So I think I'm definitely Team Clarkson on this. I
All
mean,
of these people are gonna like end up on like Ben Shapiro's Daily Wire. They're just gonna suck up all of these shows that people actually want to watch.
well, that's the thing. Like seriously, Jeremy Clarkson's show is the best thing on Amazon. I love it. It's hilarious. He did a derivative about farming called The Farm. He bought a farm. He tried to farm it himself. It was such a funny show. I learned more about farming than I've ever learned, and it was so entertaining. And that is now going to be killed because it upset Meghan, and that is kind of terrifying. I think that we can't have the Monty Python humor that we're so famous for for anymore. It's really quite sad, I think.
Well, you can, but like here's the thing, Isabel. Like there's this world of consensus, and after Alex Jones was kicked off Twitter, I did a show called The Death of the Jester.
Yeah.
And that's what's happened is like there's a very important role for a jester in society.
Yeah.
And you know, everyone has come to the consensus that we kill the jesters now. That's what we have to do. Which means that like for those of us who view ourselves as jesters or in the role of the paradoxical in that way, the only alpha that exists now is in transgression. And that's really important to understand that like the only thing that one can do now, if you truly want to be humorful and edgy and poignant, is to transgress the rules that were transgressible. Like 10 years ago, it was de rigueur and cliche to transgress them. Now, transgressing them is the only comedic alpha that exists.
Yeah.
So, like, and by the way, if that's true, if I'm right about that, that means humor is going to get really racist real quick, and it's going to be hard for a lot of people.
Well, it's funny, and this is probably we probably have to close soon, but during communism,
you cringed when I said that. Why?
Because it reminded me of what I'm about to say. So in Poland during communism, in terms of like the subversive press, and the Samazdats, there were all these cartoons that used to circulate, and they were hilarious because in a cartoon you could tell like there were so many elements. It was all plausibly deniable because there were lots of different layers to the joke, and depending on which side of the political spectrum you sat on, the joke was funny in different ways. But it was also like the filthiest time, like in terms of some of the other like, so you'd have the political jokes, but you also had absolutely filthy, basic, like her sexist, misogynist stuff and racist stuff, because once you're breaking those taboos, because like even ordinary things are so subversive, I guess it elevates stuff that shouldn't really be considered taboo to the realms of the taboo, because they're both seen as so controversial that they equate to each other when really they don't equate. But that's what happens when you stigmatize relatively benign jokes that should be just allowed in society.
Well, yeah. Now the transgression is so at hand, and so if you want to transgress, you just have to say something that was formerly benign that would have gotten a little chuckle or like made some people uncomfortable at a dinner table. Now that joke is so transgressive that it is so inappropriate that either if said appropriately, like in the right context, it's going to be so funny and so unexpected and put people so off guard they won't know what to do. So like I just think that people don't realize that you can try to kill the jesters, but jesters will find a way. And
they will find a way.
And there will be. It's the most transgressive humor is the humor that will win nowadays. It's the place that you're not allowed to go, so that is the place that has to be gone.
Yeah, because it's all cyclical, and eventually, what's the generation that comes after Z?
A.
But is that what it's called?
Double
like,
A. In my Excel spreadsheet, double A comes after Z.
I don't know if it's like number plates. Will we roll over to like, I don't know, but that next generation, because I think Z is still very woke, right? It's very social justicey, I think. Or is Z getting a bit better? I don't know. But I suspect.
I don't know. I don't think that there's any hope for Z or the younger millennials. I've been advocating for just a Gen Z and young millennial genocide for years.
But yeah, by the next generation, that generation should be quite all right, because it is generational. So it's like, in Ab Fab, with the show with Patsy and Adina, right? The joke is that they're like these children of the 60s and they have no boundaries. They're like drunk all the time. But the daughter is super conservative because the role reversal is about the generational backlash against whatever your parents were.
It's only going to be true, Isabella, if we can get this testosterone stuff back under control.
In what sense? You want some more?
Men have like the lowest testosterone levels in the history of humanity.
Oh, you know what?
People like testosterone shots at like the age of like 7.
Somebody was mentioning that on my Discord today, and saying that it's a real blind spot. And if the rates continue to go down at the rate they are going down, then we are on an extinction pathway. And that this is really a tragedy.
People with testosterone,
huh?
You just inject people with testosterone.
No, it's not. Sorry. It's sperm count. I got it wrong. It was sperm count.
I am struck by the number of men who will like walk up to me and say, like, "You grow such a beautiful beard. I can't grow a beard." Right. And they're not all Chinese people either. So.
No, I was talking about sperm count. Sorry, and fertility rates.
Well, I'm just talking about how beards are a great symbol of fertility and sperm and.
Okay.
Well,
Yes, you're very hairy. That's great. I'm proud of your hair.
No, but there's a lot of weird things happening. I do wonder what the next generations are going to do, and it is going to depend a lot, I think, on the ability and willingness of these generations to be transgressive and to buck trends and to be punk rock, if you will.
Yeah, being punk. Being punk right now involves being married, having 2 like normal kids, and believing in like incredibly boring things.
The rise of the re-rise of religion.
God damn it!
I honestly think that there is also a sort of problem with adulthood in that I think it's hard to find meaning in adulthood anymore. I think it used to be that you had daily tasks. You'd have to go and feed the cows and the horses. And nowadays, like, there just isn't. Like, the only thing you have is recreation, like on the weekends or something like that. There's nothing you have to do during the day. And I think it's really hard as young people becoming adults, trying to figure out what they're going to do if it's not productive. Like, that's why people like maybe go to, move to Colorado or these other places where there are like lots of hiking and such. But that kind of thing is like, it's very difficult for adults to find meaning.
Yeah, this is very Heidegger-esque, right? We have to have
and Frankel.
Yeah, once the economic problem is solved, or we are we're so rich we don't even notice, hardship anymore. We become we self-sabotage to the point. Actually, there was a really interesting thing I read. I don't know if it's true or not. Apparently, there was some experiment with mice. Maybe someone in the comments knows. Where they gave these mice everything they wanted, and there was a phase where I think it was called the beautiful mice. They were like beautiful and big.
The beautiful ones, I think, is what
the beautiful ones, right? Yeah. But then they soon started to turn on each other and cannibalizing each other, and
every generation subsequently got smaller. They bifurcated into groups of like woke mice and mean mice.
Yes.
It's like really it's really an interesting experiment, and they ran it numerous times, and apparently it happened again and again and again. Like if they gave them these similar conditions.
So if that follows, if we're in that cycle,
the beautiful ones, it bifurcated into a group that would always just groom themselves. They would just spend their whole day grooming themselves. That was it.
Well, that's the Kim Kardashians.
Yes, and the wokies.
Yeah, it's the Kim. The king, so the Instagram culture, that is the beautiful ones, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh wow. So what comes next? When do we turn on each other and start eating each other?
I don't know if they ate each other, but they became smaller and smaller and more
mycelism or whatever.
I don't know if they became more effete, and then they just stopped producing babies.
And then they just had no purpose in life, and they died.
And they all went extinct.
Yeah, that's where we're going. Well, on that bombshell, which leads to a lack of meaning in adulthood. But that was Heidegger's point, that it's not just economic materialist needs that the economic system has to satisfy, has to give people a sense of purpose. And he called that Dasein, I think it was, and said that you have to have a search for meaning. You have to have meaning in the economic model, and if you don't have meaning, it's
well, this is this
bad
combined with
idea.
like a Viktor Frankl sort of framework, I think is very important. And I mean, this is the thing. Like, I read Viktor Frankl in high school; is the most important book I ever read. And
Kardashians make loads of babies, though. That's true.
they do make a babies, um, but like I think that there's this notion that you have to be able to give yourself a farm, if you will. Like, you have to give yourself tasks every day, and they have to be meaningful. They can't be meaningless. You have to be producing value, and there's simulated versions of this, like with World of Warcraft, in video games, which give you, I think, a similar dopamine release to like doing daily tasks. But I think that's what like gamers have figured out, is that like doing gaming gives you, like, doing real world tasks, that dopamine release is the same dopamine release you get
Yeah.
in video games, and that you get from accomplishments there. And that's
Because our entire risk profile it needs a challenge. Like, we need continuous challenges to overcome. And very often when people retire, like, they have heart attacks and die. I mean, obviously they're older as well, but there is some element of like causality with, I think there is, I don't know, I might be making it up, but I'm pretty sure like you hear stories like, oh,
It's
and
true.
he
No, it's
just
true. There's
retired.
a lot of heart attacks right after retirement. And with that, everyone, I want to announce that I am actually interviewing for Jordan Peterson's role. I'm talking to God next week, seeing if I can take it over. So I think that's it. Are we done?
Yeah.
Oh,
On that bombshell, we are definitely done. So thank you very much. We're going to
humans
come
are
back
going
next week.
extinct.
Hopefully Michael will join us. I make no promises because he's busy, but hopefully he will. And on that
Cool.
note, bye. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Love you all.